Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. This episode will take a look at Flash Airlines of Egypt. In the mid-1990s, Egypt began to see the start of a tourism boom. The Gulf War had ended and relative peace had settled over the area. The recession, which had crippled the global and particularly European economies, had begun to settle, and now folks were able to afford to travel abroad once again. While there was a growing demand to visit Egypt, there seemed to be a reluctance from European leisure airlines from operating to the land of Ra. This was simply because there was greater demand for flights to more traditional holiday destinations around the Mediterranean, Canary Islands or Greek islands. It also allowed better aircraft utilisation, with those European-based aircraft operating several short hops to the Med than an all-day-long affair flying to Egypt and back. Because of this, several new Egyptian-based airlines were formed, all hoping to capitalise on the tourism boom. One of these airlines was Heliopolis Airlines, named after the ancient Egyptian city of Heliopolis, of which the latter-day city had been absorbed into the ever-expanding Cairo. Heliopolis Airlines was founded in 1995 and was headquartered, oddly enough, in Heliopolis, Cairo. Heliopolis Airlines was given its air operator's certificate in the spring of 1996 and would soon take delivery of its first aircraft. At the end of August, the McDonnell Douglas MD-83, leased from Ansett Worldwide and delivered brand new from the Long Beach factory, arrived in Cairo, ready to start service with Heliopolis. The aircraft wore the airline's new livery, a fairly smart affair consisting of a dark royal blue belly crossed with 3 gold cheat lines and a sandy white upper fuselage. The tail was also blue and featured the company logo, a stylized form of the ancient Egyptian symbol for the sun god Aten, a sun disk with its rays extended out into hands, symbolizing light, life and energy. Heliopolis Airlines gained several contracts with tour operators both inside and out of Egypt, which would see the airline bring tourists from Spain, Italy, France and Switzerland. Their sole MD-83 really stretched its legs, operating flights to Barcelona, Paris, Zurich, Bologna and Verona, and all were bound for the Red Sea resorts of Sharm Sheikh. Some flights would operate via Cairo, with the airline operating a domestic service too, shuttling tourists from the beaches of the Red Sea up to the pyramids of Giza. With Heliopolis having a good first year of operations, it was decided to scale up, with the airline bringing in its first wide-body aircraft. In October 1997, an Airbus A310-200 wide-body twinjet joined the fleet. The aircraft was leased from Airbus Financial Services, and in my opinion it looked excellent in the Heliopolis livery. The aircraft did have an interesting history. As the 18th A310 to roll off the Toulouse assembly line back in 1983, this aircraft was delivered to Kuwait Airways. It had a seemingly uneventful life until August 1990, when it was seized by Iraqi forces during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. It, along with 4 more A310s and a single A300, were flown to Iran. They were repainted into the distinctive green and white livery of Iraqi Airways and allocated registrations by the Iraqi Directorate of Air Safety, ahead of service with the Iraqi flag carrier. The aircraft would not see commercial service, however. Due to the escalating conflict in the area and established no-fly zones, the entire Iraqi Airways fleet was grounded, including its stolen aircraft. There was also the issue of Iran and Iraq not actually getting along, to put it mildly, so when Iran was offered $20 million to release the 5 aircraft back to Kuwait, they happily obliged. On a side note, Iraq also flew 2 Boeing 747-200s to Iran in the hope of keeping them safe, and unfortunately for them, both were confiscated, with the better conditioned of the pair being absorbed into the Iranian Air Force fleet, and the other being stripped for spares. So much for the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Having regained its freedom, the aircraft was acquired by Airbus Financial Services, who after an overhaul placed the aircraft with Qatar Airlines in 1994. It then joined the Spanish Oasis International Airlines for 2 years before heading to Egypt. The arrival of the A310 gave the impression that Heliopolis was going from strength to strength, but in reality the airline was struggling. Shortly after the widebody joined the fleet, the MD-83 was returned to the leasing company. It was too much of a financial burden to operate 2 vastly different aircraft types. It didn't help that the winter season is a much quieter period in Europe than in the summertime, even for places with guaranteed sun, such as the Egyptian Red Sea resorts. In an effort to boost its cash reserves during this quieter period, Heliopolis dispatched its A310 over to Mexico, placing it on a damp lease agreement with Aero Cancun. Owned by a consortium of Mexican hoteliers and the Spanish-based Oasis Group, Aero Cancun at one point was the largest leisure airline in Mexico. However, it had fallen on hard times thanks in part to the financial struggles of its parents. The airline had drastically cut its fleet and route network, and in an effort to avoid growing competition from European airlines, had begun to focus on routes to South America. As part of the damp lease agreement, the pilots and maintenance staff were employed by Heliopolis, however the cabin crew would be provided by Aero Cancun. While Heliopolis managed to operate a few flights under this arrangement, it was not going to be the cash cow that it had hoped for, as just weeks into the operation, Aero Cancun ceased operations due to the collapse of the Oasis Group, who, ironically, were the previous operator of said A310. With the A310 shipped back to Egypt, it once again shuttled holidaymakers between Europe and Egypt. However, the airline was still struggling to pay its bills on time, and the end was fast approaching. On the 3rd of June 1998, the A310 arrived at London Stansted Airport to operate a charter flight back to Egypt, when it was suddenly seized and impounded by the leasing company due to the continued lack of payment of the lease fees. With its sole aircraft repossessed, Heliopolis Airlines was forced to suspend operations indefinitely. Remarkably, in February 2000, Heliopolis Airlines were back in business. This was not some miracle, however, but simply an act of convenience. The carrier had been acquired by the Flash Group in an attempt at launching their own airline using the certification of the dormant Heliopolis and thus avoiding lots of red tape. The Flash Group was founded in 1985 and had fingers in many pies across the tourism sector in Egypt. The group owned 2 hotels, one in Sharm Sheikh, the other in Hurghada, 3 yachts which were used for snorkeling and diving trips, a diving school, 5 Nile River cruising boats, 18 tourist coaches and an Italian restaurant. The group also owned Flash Tour, one of the leading travel agencies in Egypt which had specialised in inbound tourism, handling around 120,000 customers a year, so that an airline would almost certainly be a good fit within the group. While everything else in the group was named Flash, Heliopolis would resume operations under its own name. The distinctive Heliopolis livery was replaced, however, in favour of a more traditional blue and white affair. The revived airline took delivery of its first aircraft in February 2000 with the arrival of a 7-year-old Boeing 737-300. It was joined 2 months later by a second 737. The 2 aircraft had nearly identical histories. The pair were separated in age by just 3 months and had both been in service with TACA International Airlines of El Salvador and then the Norwegian low-fare airline Color Air before moving to the warmer climes of Egypt. It was a bit of a false start, however. After operating flights for just a little over 2 months, the fleet was disbanded when the first 737 was shipped off to Algeria, where it was chartered by Eco Air International, a fairly new startup airline which would utilise the fully crewed Heliopolis aircraft on its own services. The second of the Heliopolis 737s was less fortunate, in more ways than one, as it was returned to the leasing company barely a month after its arrival in Egypt. It remained in the country, so to speak, as it was picked up by another Egyptian carrier, Mediterranean Airlines. The aircraft, placed with Eco Air International, returned to Egypt in January 2001 and resumed operating a sporadic charter program for Heliopolis, but changes were afoot. It was decided to rebrand Heliopolis Airlines to Flash Airlines and bring it in line with the rest of the Flash Group companies. The rebranding was rather clunky, gradually taking place between early June and July of 2001 and resulted in some interesting livery combinations. The 737, which had been in service with Eco Air, lost its Heliopolis branding and titles, and in its place wore large generic Flash Airlines titles towards the rear of the fuselage, and had a plain white tail, for a while at least. The other 737 rejoined the Flash fleet after its stint with Mediterranean Airlines and was subject to quite a hodgepodge of liveries. The aircraft retained the basic Mediterranean Airlines livery with its red, white and blue cheat lines. However, the remaining branding was painted over and frankly, it didn't exactly look great to see with all those random white patches all over the aircraft fuselage and engines. The aircraft was also adorned with the Flash Airlines logo, done in the same style of the other Flash Group companies, and this was placed on the forward fuselage. The tail featured a Flash Group logo with "Member of Flash Group" written around it, and was placed on a particularly white patch of paintwork. They weren't done with the stencils yet though. By the end of the year, that aircraft had also been given large Flash Airlines titles on the rear fuselage to match its sister ship, and both aircraft had received attention to their tail design, with them being adorned with a large version of the new Flash Group logo, a blue circle with the letter F. It would take the airline several more months before revising this with a larger letter F and placing it in the centre of the circle, and of course giving both aircraft a unified look by repainting them both into the full and final Flash Airlines livery. The two 737s were once again hard at work, bringing tourists into Egypt from across Europe as well as operating domestic flights within Egypt. The aircraft were familiar sights in Paris as Flash had once again picked up contracts with a French tour operator who had been very loyal to Heliopolis. It was a similar story in Bologna, with the 737s being regular visitors there. The aircraft could also be seen venturing into Spain and Germany, particularly Madrid, Parma, Frankfurt and Dusseldorf. Flash had also gained contracts to operate leisure flights from Warsaw in Poland, Pori in Finland and Zurich, Switzerland. Things really were looking up for the airline, at least from the outside. They had gained lots of contracts and were flying to more destinations than ever. Their fleet was also finally in a uniformed livery, which was no longer a patchwork of various operators and white paint overs. While things appeared to be going well from the outside, Flash was in trouble. Despite the illusion of being a very large corporation, the Flash Group was spreading itself very thin financially, and Flash Airlines was running under a tight budget. In April 2002, Swiss authorities boarded a Flash 737 for a routine inspection. These can and do happen and are perfectly normal. I myself have had my aircraft boarded by the aviation authorities en route numerous times over the years. In the case of Flash, however, there were several deficiencies noted, including missing pilot oxygen masks, empty crew portable oxygen tanks, defective fuel gauges, and that there were maintenance issues found with the engines, flight controls and landing gear. While this was a serious matter, it could have easily been resolved. However, a follow-up inspection on the same aircraft that October saw no improvement. In fact, authorities had noticed a very concerning discrepancy with the aircraft's technical and maintenance documentation. A result of the two failed inspections and the paperwork issue would see Flash Airlines denied permission to continue operating into Swiss airspace. In October 2002, a Flash Airlines 737 operating from Sharm el-Sheikh bound for Bologna via Milan was forced to make an emergency landing in Athens following an engine failure. Passengers on board spoke of communication issues between the crew and passengers, given that the crew didn't speak Italian and had difficulty communicating in English. After several hours, the passengers were put in a hotel and later flown to Milan and forced to continue the rest of the journey by road. After several days on the ground for repair, the aircraft was ferried back to Egypt. In light of this and the continuing concerns regarding the airline, Polish authorities conducted their own inspection of a Flash aircraft, which would lead to the airline being banned from Polish airspace by the end of 2002. Despite the Swiss and Polish bans, Flash Airlines continued to operate as normal, and having found itself with spare capacity, it was able to source short-term contracts elsewhere. In the spring of 2003, Flash Airlines regained approval to operate flights into Poland, having satisfied the authorities that the airline had made sufficient improvements. To be fair, they had. The main aircraft of concern, Sierra Uniform Zulu Charlie Foxtrot, which had failed the Swiss inspections, had been sent away to Stavanger for a D-check by the very experienced and reputable Brathens SAS. The other 737, Sierra Uniform Zulu Charlie Delta, also underwent a heavy maintenance check following the return of its sister ship. 2003 was seemingly a fresh start for Flash Airlines. Both of its aircraft had undergone heavy maintenance checks, and a busy flying schedule lay ahead. With the Polish removing restrictions on Flash Airlines, the carrier looked set to be busier than ever. Flash also picked up a contract to operate flights from both Joensuu and Kokkola in Finland. It was only a temporary gig, with the airline standing in for another carrier for a couple of months, but work is work, and Flash were happy to have it. Unfortunately, while 2003 had been the airline's best, 2004 started in the worst way imaginable, when on the 3rd of January Flight 604 crashed, killing all 148 passengers and crew. The aircraft, Sierra Uniform Zulu Charlie Foxtrot, had departed Sharm el-Sheikh at 4:42 local time, bound for Paris via Cairo. Moments after takeoff, the captain became disorientated due to the lack of visual cues outside in the dark, pre-sunrise skies and over the unlit waters of the Red Sea. He overbanked the aircraft, leading to it stalling and crashing into the sea with the loss of all on board. While the investigation into the crash took several years and the cause is still disputed today, the effect on Flash Airlines was immediate. With the airline's fleet cut in half and very intense media scrutiny, not just on the airline but also overseas leisure airlines in general, Flash Airlines was forced to cease operations almost immediately. In March 2004, the sole surviving aircraft, which had been impounded in Egypt, was ferried to Ireland after a pit stop in Malta and would find a new home in the Cayman Islands. The Flash Group removed all traces of Flash Airlines from their website, but unbelievably would have another venture into the airline business. In 2007 they launched Euro-Mediterranean Airlines in partnership with Air Italy. With a single Boeing 757 based in Sharm el-Sheikh, the airline followed the same model as its predecessor, operating flights across Europe and into Russia, with the aim of bringing tourists into the Red Sea resort. Euro-Mediterranean would rebrand as the clunky-sounding Air Italy Egypt in September 2009, but within weeks had ceased operations due to financial difficulties. Remarkably, 20 years after Flash Airlines ceased operations, the Flash Group is still in business, and in fact is now a very successful company, having expanded operations into Dubai, Zanzibar and Sicily. The company continues to run numerous hotels, still operates a large fleet of Nile riverboats, and even continues to operate that Italian restaurant which seemed so out of place in the listings years ago. The Flash transport fleet now stands at over 100 vehicles ranging from 50-seater coaches to jeeps and VIP cars, but for now at least, Flash no longer has an airline. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, suggestions or criticisms, please do get in touch. If you can't comment below, don't worry. I've got a contact form on my website, and I'm also on Facebook, Twitter and Reddit. I have plenty more episodes in the works, so if you haven't already, why not subscribe to catch them as they land, and as always, thanks for watching.